Good evening, and welcome to the first Business Committee meeting for 2018-2019. I'd like to call the meeting to order and recognize that tonight's meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw people. Are there any additions, deletions, or changes in order to the agenda?
Have you talked about this? You guys talked about this? You and Scott?
Yeah, so I was gonna make an announcement about
Okay.
that. So the only so if you look at your agenda item, I think it's unfinished business 10.1 under Secretary Treasurer McVeigh regarding the operating surplus deficit policy. There was a bit of a mix-up in the attachments for that policy regarding the administrative procedure, which begins on page 53. Thank you. So the one that you have here in the agenda package is the unedited version. Is that correct?
Well, essentially what happened is in your package, you were provided with a tracked changes version of both the policy and the admin procedure so that you could see what the changes that were made are, and then a clean copy was attached. And the clean copy for the policy is accurate, but what happened is in error, the clean copy for the admin procedure is the old one without the incorporated changes. So we're just suggesting that we bring this to our October meeting just so that everybody has a package that's completely accurate.
So just to be clear, I guess this evening we were looking for a recommendation for this policy to bring to the full board this month, but because of the change here, we're gonna wait a month and do it in October, although we will be speaking to the policy and the surpluses for this year.
Item 10.1 still needs to remain on the agenda.
So it'll remain on the agenda, but the recommendation will be postponed a month. With that confusion, any objections to the approval of tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we're looking for approval for the minutes for June 13th. Are there any additions, changes, deletions, whatnot?
Yeah, there was one, which I'll try to find quickly here. It was the motion that was made and seconded, but and it has the names, but I don't think it has the. Here it is. It may have been corrected since I read this. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's been corrected.
You good?
The motion itself wasn't in the minutes that I read, but
okay.
It's obviously been corrected, so thank you.
Okay. Any other changes?
I have a clarification. Could you be that I'm not used to how it's written? Under the secretary, under the budget motion, we did conduct all three meetings, and the way I'm reading it makes it look like we opposed doing all three meetings. Am I just reading that incorrectly?
So this was the business committee meeting?
Yeah.
So that was a recommendation to the
Right,
full board?
so we did. You're
All
right.
the
I
three readings
apologize.
were done by the full board?
You're right. I apologize. That's where I got confused.
Okay, so barring those two comments, any objection to the approval of minutes for June 13th, 2018? Seeing none, those minutes are adopted. We have no
one thing, sorry. Eliminate the position at the bottom, page 4. Eliminate the position of deputy superintendent. Opposed by, I don't see my name on there.
Because you didn't oppose it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah,
Yeah, he did.
yeah.
Oh, wait a
Feel free to
minute.
check the
I know,
video.
I'm just saying you voted in.
You
favor
voted, he
of
did.
the
No, you did. You
motion.
voted in favor of it, no?
No, I was voting.
Okay,
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
okay.
so I guess let's not accept the minutes, and we'll have staff review the video to check to make sure that trustee Routley's vote is correctly cast on the minutes. All right, so we have no presentation for tonight's business committee meeting, and we'll lead off with senior staff reports. Item 8.1, the Director of Planning and Operations, Mr. Pete Sable, will give us a breakdown for the Hammond Bay expansion and gym update, the Frank J. Nay expansion update, and a summary of the work that's been completed over the summer.
Thank you, and good evening.
Good evening.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the trustees tonight and advise them of some of the work we did over the summer. And there's quite a bit of information on the slides, and I won't read it all. But by all means, interrupt for questions, and if there's questions arising out of the information, of course, always available to take a look at that. Now, I don't think I have the exact order of the agenda, and please bear with me with respect to the slides. I did incorporate slides from a number of slideshows, so the formatting is off. I'm a bit challenged that way, but we'll just jump right into it. So I wanted to make sure I took the opportunity to thank all the departments that don't necessarily get mentioned in the work that goes on. It's not just facilities, it's kind of the outcomes that we're after, and you know, every department in the district is involved in one project or another, from finance, purchasing, all of that. So it's all in effort for us to deliver customer service to our schools. In the facilities department, we did go live on our new software, Perfect Mind. And I'm trying something new. I've highlighted sort of the item I want to talk about a little bit more, and not necessarily just, as I said, read the slides. So we're working out bugs. And, you know, if I had time to do diagrams, I'd find the biggest bug I could find, and I'd kind of put that on there. It's, you know, City of Nanaimo has the same software. They went live just before us. They had to pull theirs offline. They had problems. We haven't had to do that, but we are still working through user bugs and departmental issues with respect to how it integrates with finance and getting reports, et cetera. And I appreciate the patience of the finance department as we work through that. With respect to the maintenance department, this is from the Office of the Manager of Maintenance, and there's sort of two things that Brian was working on in maintenance. One was the reopening of Woodlands. That came very late. So the VAST satellite came very late, so he had to do a substantial amount of work. Not so much planning time available, so it was just a lot of direct implementation. And so thanks to Brian for that. And he also advanced the preventive maintenance initiative, which is for us to put in all of those items that we believe our buildings require, put them in as pre-done work orders with times on them, and then that allows us to track at the end of the year how many of those we did, and report out to the trustees with respect to how the services match the requirements, the building requirements, and comes in handy at budget time. General summer maintenance, there's a long list of things that we focus on when school's out, when the general work orders die out, like the school generated work orders. So you can take a look at those things as well. Every department is represented in one manner or another. Transportation, a lot of support for school and project work and transportation. Of course, one of the big items was support for the closure of Rutherford, relocation of equipment to receiving schools. Also the support of setting up the new divisions that were determined before the summer, and we called that our September 2018 space requirement project, and I'll speak more about that. General transportation, we finalized some bus routes, but the main thing is that's the time when we make sure we service all the equipment. So the equipment's essentially offline in some cases, and we make sure that we go through all of them and that the buses are safe for September, etc. Kind of our summer clean opportunity. In operations, Dan Bunna, one of the big things for her in the summer is to support all the capital activities. And this year we had some very late construction, and so that challenged her a little bit. And we had down here assessed requirements for Labor Day weekend. So we actually had 6 staff that we had to change the shift and work Saturday, Sunday to assist us in getting schools open for the Tuesday. Also, her department cleans all the schools, and there's a list of items that they go through to make sure that the buildings are completely clean and ready for students. It's our opportunity to get into every nook and cranny and do extra services. It's also the time for the custodians to take vacation, so they take the bulk of their vacations during August. Other work of the operations department, Diane published an updated custodial manual. We do the inspection reports every year for 3 schools, and she considered the results of those in our 18-19 adjustments to cleaning assignments. That helps us balance cleaning loads. We've implemented the rest of the organic recycling program, so for September 4th, all schools were equipped and had instructions how this operates. And so Diane's been fielding questions as school get underway as to the schools that are implementing it for the first time to make sure that they're up and running. There's a few duties for staff and a few duties for caretakers to make sure. There were some budget initiatives to support the schools that came through in last year's budget and this year's budget, and maybe I will talk about stage drapery. So we have some needs in stage drapery. Diane got to update some blind replacement in schools. You want to see a department that's excited? Somebody who gets money for blinds.
And chariots too.
And of course, the auto scrubbers, we have now 1 in every school. And labor-saving devices for custodians, and again, very excited about these things. They really do help out, and so the facilities appreciates the support given. And of course, we had to go down and train. We had a Pro-D workshop on a number of things for the custodians, and one of them was training on the auto scrubber implementation. And of course, we're always training on communication and team building. Very pleased with the work Diane puts into her professional development. In the energy management department, we had a change. Emil Block had left the district, and Rob Lumsden agreed to come in as acting energy manager just late in July, and I'll be working with him to try and firm him up in that role as the fall goes on. And he jumped right in, and he presented our Q1 energy management report to BC Hydro during the summer, and proving his resilience right off the bat, and making sure that Hydro needs with respect to the energy manager funding are met. And so we were quite pleased with that. Our lighting program is approved and organized, so we'll have 11 schools will see LED lighting go in, and some, including the DAC office, and LED exterior lighting upgrades. He's also organized to continue the behavioral programs, including the Energy Cup and Energy Wise network with the schools this year. We're hoping to increase. Mike Ross in the planning department, very much focused on all of these acronyms.
Before you go on there,
Yes.
we have 2 questions here. Trustee Solomon has a question, and then Trustee Rowley.
It was just going back one slide. Do you know offhand what the cost for the scrubbers are? I didn't realize we were doing the entire district this year.
I'm going to start, and Jetta can help me. I think they're approximately 10,000 each, and I think we bought 50 total. 13 new and 2 replacements.
So you're saying there's 15 in total?
No, every school has one now. Oh, the total number, I don't have that,
Yeah, that's fine.
but every school now has at least one.
Yeah, okay.
And so we've advanced getting every school an auto scrubber. So now this next year we'll be looking at those ones that require replacements or any additions that we want to make based on the size of the school or the number of floors.
What's the expected life span of a Chariot auto scrubber?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I think they get midlife upgrades with batteries and different parts of them, so we can extend the life depending on the amount of use they get.
Trustee Rowley?
On regards to the lighting program, now you're saying approved, that was approved by the DAC, approved by, is that what you're saying? Like approved by budget?
The lighting program is part of our strategic energy management plan that we put in place with BC Hydro, and it's funded mainly through or completely through our annual facilities grant, and it approximates about $350,000.
Okay, so it's a grant from BC
No, the annual
Hydro to us.
Good question. We the funding we use to implement the lighting is out of the annual facilities grant, which is funding about $3 million that's given to the district every year from the ministry. And we're allowed to do infrastructure upgrade projects with that funding. when we do those projects, BC Hydro will provide us with a grant. And that helps offset the cost of running that program.
So just a follow-up question, why wouldn't you do all the schools with LED and then the cost savings from that would be maybe substantial enough to do the lines or to contribute towards the lines? Like why not just go do all the schools then? Even if some of it's out of pocket, some of it's part of the grant.
I think
Because of the energy savings.
Great question. I think that with the annual facilities grant, there's so many different projects that need to be serviced. It's very difficult to focus on one particular project. It also puts an onerous demand in some cases on that department. In other words, it's better for continuous staffing to do a section at a time rather than try and do it all at once in one school year. And so there's a number of different reasons why we have programs go out in stages.
Trustee Bursbridge has a-
Thank you. And just when we went back to this slide, I saw sweater days, and it reminded me of a question that somebody asked me in the summer. How are we doing in June when we sometimes get really hot weather with our schools not being too hot in terms of air conditioning or air flow? And have we heard anything?
I think, yes, we do here. I think the relative performance or the indoor temperature is directly related to the exterior temperature in the summer and the amount of window openings that we have. In other words, we don't have any air conditioning, and it's just like your home with no air conditioning. There's certain strategies you employ to keep the temperature down, but classrooms can become higher than desired during the warmer months before school's out. So no sweater days in June.
Yeah, but is there anything that we can do, or that we have been trying to mitigate it, and it hasn't become horrible yet?
It's not something that we have a program to try and address.
Okay.
I think the only way to try and address those programs is through like an air conditioning program, and that's not something that's supported by the ministry in new schools, and it's not something that we've been looking to retrofit. I think good practices at the school level can help mitigate the temperature in the rooms.
Okay.
For Mike Ross, most of his area focused on a lot of the capital programs. We have the capital expansion program, the school enhancement program, the space classroom enhancement fund, thank you, and the playground enhancement program, local capital, and various operating space projects. Lots of them. Yeah, thank you. And of course, various other planning and implementation support. The annual facilities grant itself, here's where we get into some of the projects. Again, it's about $3 million. Non-urgent projects were delayed to accommodate our classroom preparations for September. These are the projects that we actually implemented, either completed or got a start on, and they're working into September. Not all the projects, but projects funded out of the annual facilities grant. Again, I won't read it, but just various things that we work on. Also in the summer, in the annual facilities grant, of course, we have to plan for the work we have yet to do. So there's a long list of projects that we're planning all the time to bring to fruition so that we can give the implementation instructions to either augment or internal forces. One of the ongoing items that we're working on always is our resource and contingency planning, emergent projects. Are we addressing district needs in an emergent basis? Are we going to spend all the funding? Do we have the resources to do that? There's a lot of effort goes into that part of the organization.
Trustee Brennan has a question.
Yes.
Just, Mr. Sable, on the Nanaimo Ladies with Public Schools accessibility, can you describe that? And
Yes.
What it's for?
There's sort of two things going on with accessibility right now. Last year, a budget was approved for 18-19 to address accessibility issues, and in that fund, it was envisioned that there would be a portion of that to help with the Georgia Avenue playground. There's also some room in that budget to look at other issues with NLPS accessibility to our buildings. We also plan out of AFG for accessibility for our schools and all other projects. So we've listed it under AFG, but actually there's funding in other areas to help implement those projects.
Things like
Ramps, perhaps doing a survey of the entire district to see where the accessibility needs are. Individual student needs come into it, where we'll hear from a school that we have a student coming into the school and they want to access a certain part of the building. And so instead of going through and making every building 100% accessible on speculation, part of our strategy is to not only do that, but to also accommodate individual students. And so we'll go out there and meet with the Learning Services Department and make sure that those students' needs are accommodated.
Okay. I remember that being done at Rock City sometime back.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Trustee Robinson?
Yes, I noticed, thankfully, that the accessible playground at Georgia is on that list. It's my understanding that work is going to start on that relatively soon. Am I correct? Or?
Well, I have a slide later on about that project, and I'll touch on that a bit. Thank you.
Trustee Higginson?
So I have a question that's kind of a bigger picture question. On one of the previous slides, you had SEP and the CEP and all AFG, all the different grants that we get for capital. And just even in our lifetime as a board, some of those have emerged. And it made me think about the capital budget and wondering our role as advocates. And you might not have an answer to this right away, so you can take it away if you don't. Would it be easier on staff if there was one single capital budget as opposed to all these little bolt-ons that seem to be emerging these days? Is that worth it for us to start as a board to advocate for a shift in the capital budget so it's one budget as opposed to a whole bunch of separate budgets that seem to kind of be emerging?
To think about that. I think that from the district's perspective, my first response would be, it doesn't really matter how they give it to us. If they're giving us money and they're giving us new money, we're always appreciative of that. If they're finding more efficient ways to deliver it, to keep, to be more organized, then we would appreciate that as well. Yeah.
I had a quick question regarding the North Oyster
Playground?
Yes.
And you might be able to anticipate what it is, but, they've won the $100,000 from the ICBC, BCAA playground thing. Understand just from the PAC that there's a little bit of a hiccup getting their plan implemented, and I'm wondering where we're at with that, if that's been resolved, or if there's an anticipated resolution date, or...
There has been a little bit of a hiccup. Somewhere along the line in the collaboration process, sort of the district standards that were expressed, the grant hasn't met those head on, and so, or they've met it and it's been more head on. So a little bit of work is required to work our way through that, to determine how that impacts district standards. Are we going to vary district standards? We have a meeting set up, I believe, for tomorrow afternoon with the committee, a significant amount of senior management, and we've drawn that group together to meet with the committee so that we can work through the issues faster, so that we can make sure that the grant doesn't get in jeopardy, but that we all understand what we're looking at approving. Okay.
Thanks.
Natasha had a question, and then I just had a comment.
Yeah, sure. Trustee Bob?
I was just curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on the gender-neutral washroom plan. What is that looking like?
Oh, the
Or the
gender-neutral
signage?
washroom signage?
Yes.
Yes, we've been working with Learning Services. They're looking to make a change to the current gender-neutral washroom signage.
Oh, okay.
And so we've been presented with a new sort of logo to consider, replacing all of the existing ones. And so we're just working through the process to make sure we understand exactly what that means so that we can scope it and put a budget number to it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Comment?
It was just going back to the communication issue with regards to playground, and I was just going to add that this is, when these things happen, it's a really good opportunity for us to talk about what we could do to prevent, improve, those things. So it's probably an opportunity for us to engage in some conversations with DPAC and perhaps policy around playgrounds and again, just to get ahead of it and prevent these kind of things. So that's top of mind with staff as well.
Good, glad to hear it. Trustee Rowley?
Resource contingency planning, what does that mean? Just,
There's context.
So
just at the very bottom.
So resourcing every one of these projects to be implemented, it requires resources, forces, suppliers, contractors, internal district forces. So understanding which projects are approved, what the scope of those, what the budget are, how many forces that we require to spend the money by March 31st. We're always trying to work through that to as projects get designed and we understand the value and we understand the scope of that work, then we can start to understand how much resource it's going to take. And one of the issues we have with the grant is they request that we spend it all in a specific period of time. So you get the money on April 1st, better be ready with forces to get going, and then the money ends on March 31st. And so it's very difficult to juggle to have all the projects fit within that window.
That's 1 year, you're saying?
That's 1 year, and then the next year, same thing.
Are you able to get as many like in-house staff within that year as you can to kind of prevent the cost of contracting versus staff here that are able to do it kind of thing?
That's why we spend a lot of time on the resource planning. It's very challenging to get the people you need when you need them to do the job that you need, especially when sometimes there's difficulty with hiring. In other words, you just can't get as many people as you would like. Sometimes you have more people in a certain trade than you need for particular jobs. Other times you go to contract and you get one bid. Other times you can't get any bids. And so there's all kinds of interplay in that, and we've had some difficulty with projects this year where we didn't get any bids. We grouped 6 site projects together, site improvement safety issues together, and we tendered them, and we didn't get any bids. So, we have to look at how we're going to do that for next year, and so it's delayed some of the work a year. Yeah.
So what's the general, do we have a policy as a board on how that stuff is done in the year? I guess we don't have a written policy and how we proceed.
Written policy that would outline
Staff, like staffing, resource, contingency planning, that kind of thing.
I think we'd have to give some further thought to that, and probably the board as well, but as Pete's indicated, from year to year, from month to month, we have to be nimble and react to that and the market, and that's not something that I think you could easily define in policy. We certainly have a collective agreement with CUPE that addresses some of those matters, and that's really something that staff works with CUPE on. But in terms of policy, it would be very difficult, I think, to write a policy to address how we resource every project and piece of work that we do.
Rob Zver?
Thank you. And I wasn't really going to say much, but I know, and I don't know if it's in the plan, but there is one where there's a breakout of what we do in-house. And there is a breakout of what's been done by the contractors. And their sheet is probably longer than ours. So I can just leave that with the thoughts about where you say, are we doing it internally? To the degree, not as much as we used to, but that was choices made within the staffing process. So.
In June, we had an operating space requirement project laid out, and these were to prepare classrooms and portables for the upcoming enrollment projections and division counts that we expected at various schools. And so this was somewhere in the order of $800,000 worth of work, and included relocating CTC. It's worth kind of going through this a bit. Some DAC annex changes. NDSS, we moved and renovated a portable from Ladysmith. Cinnabar, we relocated a portable from Frank Genet. Georgia Avenue, we altered a portable on site on speculation in case we'd need it elsewhere. We did some computer lab conversions that help us with temporary classroom needs when we suddenly, a division shows up at a school and there's no portable, it'll less disruption to the school. Classroom preparations at various schools, portable prep for classrooms and divisions, and equipment, again, purchasing one of the players that comes in, and then VP offices, which we didn't get to this summer due to other pressures. So there's a whole nother body of work on top of the AFG that we had to factor in June as to get it ready for September. So that tasks put an extra load on our forces, on our plans, and we often have to shift and do that resource contingency planning. Operating projects of note, and so by operating I mean there was capital, and then there were some projects, we call them projects within within the operating envelope, and so the blinds replacement program, I spoke of that. We did some work, a school funded item on getting a totem base ready in the foyer of Ladysmith. The totem's not ready to go up, but our work is done. We did a major appliance upgrade, about $150,000, including some walk-in freezer cooler replacements out of the 17-18 and some out of 18-19. Some digital marquee signs that we're still working on for the fall. Vehicle replacement for last year complete. Got the planning complete for this year's vehicle replacement program. District composting program, as I said, refinished Seaview gym floor, and then there was a loss project at Cedar, and Brian Hackwood's working with the loss prevention company, got the whole floor redone. With schools protection, sorry, we had the whole floor redone, looks brand new. So just a few other things that went on in the summer as well. It's amazing how yellow the floors can get after 12 or more years, I think. There was some additional work through the CEF Classroom Enhancement Fund from 17-18. So there was an additional ask that we felt the ministry didn't consider. So they eventually approved an amendment for 4 portables to make up space shortage for last September. So those are just starting to arrive now and going on site. Again, another resource demand. So 2 of them are on site, Rock City and Nicole North Oyster, and the other 2 are expected to come in the next week and a half. Just setup of vast satellite at Woodlands, and again, this is how quickly the plan went together. This is just an idea to show you the area of the building and that are being used. So we prepared the gym, the stage area, and the multi-purpose. The entry area here on the side, and of course the parking used for the building. And so that's the portion of Woodlands that's being used for the satellite.
Trustee Brennan has a question. Just the, I forgot what I was going to ask. I did forget. Can you go back to the previous slide, please, Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Yeah, the portables. I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, yeah. Are they related to the need to alter the classroom structure through the Supreme Court decision?
Yes.
Okay, so those are increased space demands generated by the need to reconfigure classrooms or classes.
So we argued we were left in a space deficit at these schools. In other words, we had to put a classroom in the special ed room, and that we asked the ministry to return that special ed room as a space standard item. And so, for instance, the portable at Bayview will go on site. The division in the special ed room will be able to move into the portable, freeing up that room for that function.
And the ministry agreed that was a direct result of our need to add space.
After a significant amount of back and forth, they understood our position, yeah, and supported it.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Again, the vast. And a couple of other projects that we were working on or have been working on, and that were approved in the in March of last year. And so one of them is the addition to a Cole Hammond Bay, what we call the project definition report. Staff are working on that and having significant conversations with the ministry with respect to what the capacity of this building should be. So we've done a number of different options have been prepared, and based on a number of different capacities. And so now the ministry's asked us to supply them with enrollment information. This is part of the, to see that we're on the same page with respect to the ask. So instead of putting in an ask to the ministry that surprises them, we've had a lot of behind-the-scenes discussion to make sure that the PDR that we're going to send down is something they can entertain.
Trustee Brennan?
Thank you, Chair. The addition at Hammond Bay, will the addition size or number of classrooms result in the need to either demolish or remove some of the existing space from use?
That's exactly the process we're going through right now, and that's the question we're hoping to answer. One of the options would see some demolition and some reconstruction of space. Another option might see more of a Frank J. Ney style addition where you have a classroom block with a link. And so we're working through that with the ministry to understand. Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, at a time when we're getting significant market escalation.
Yeah.
And so that's another factor we have to work through. As well, I'll talk a little bit about seismic reports and how that's sort of flown in the middle of the PDR process. And working with the ministry on how to manage emerging seismic ratings has also been challenging.
Can I ask another question? Earlier, you talked about not being able to get some bids on some projects, and Victoria is experiencing a labor shortage, and due to many construction projects ongoing. Are we experiencing the same thing in this region? Are we experiencing shortages of skilled labor, particularly in the building trades, that result in some companies not wanting to bid because they're too busy?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and that's been driving our prices up on Frank J. Ney and on Hammond Bay Gym. We did have some areas of work that were double or more the budget.
Wow.
Yeah, on Frank J. Ney we had a budget of $500,000 for some concrete work, and it came in at $1 million. One bid, and so yeah, we had to work to break that component of work apart and address it in subcomponents in order to reduce our costs, and we had some success at
So there was no concrete cost to begin with then? Thank you, Chair.
Trustee Rowley? Has the ministry asked any questions about that north end corridor with the closure of Rutherford and then the asks? Has that been kind of looked at as a whole by the ministry?
Perhaps you can clarify. I'm not sure.
Well, I'm just wondering, because you guys have had back and forths around this project.
Right.
If they've asked questions about like projections for elementary and for school closures in the area, and if you've had to like give that information to the ministry as well.
So with Frank J. Ney, with the Cole Hammond Bay, there's kind of two areas of enrollment projections we needed to give them. One was surrounding French immersion schools. So in other words, you know, we're talking about the capacity of a French immersion school, and we actually propose that they increase the capacity. So of course we have to tell them what we have at other schools, and are we over-enrolled or under-enrolled at other schools. We also supplied the regular track for Frank J. Ney and for Departure Bay, the surrounding schools. In other words, saying there's no solution of space in the regular track either. And in fact, we had an opportunity to describe to them that there is a waiting list in French immersion for Hammond Bay in the order of 27 students, and they come from the North End corridor. And so we've shared that kind of information with them, and we're hoping that we can come to a capacity agreement with them on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, Trustee Solomon.
You actually partially answered my question in terms of the French immersion, because I was interested in, is our ask, if I'm thinking I'm correct, is we have about 350 kids at Hammond Bay. Is our ask at the 400 pupil level for Hammond Bay?
So we haven't actually formally made an ask yet to the ministry, but we have proposed to them 3 different levels of potential capacity increase. And so one would be the same amount of K intake, therefore an addition of that size. Another would be increasing K intake by 10, and another would be increasing the K intake by 20, in other words, a full K class. And so while we haven't submitted officially what we would like, we're waiting for them to respond to our rationale. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Another one of the projects that was approved was Hammond Bay Phase 2 under the SEP, and so we combined that with the gymnasium project. And while it'll finish a little sooner than the gymnasium project, we're utilizing Unitech as the general contractor, so we didn't have to go to a separate bid, and that's worked out quite well. Our 2 dust extractors that we awarded should be complete October 15. A little disruption at the school level, but again, we had some equipment ordering, some delivery items were late. Some items we ordered were late. And then Park Avenue, I think we've talked about this, where we had to use some of the Park Avenue budget to support the other projects. So we're going to look to review and rescope that project. Georgia Avenue Playground, the Playground Enhancement Project, that's one the ministry did fund under the PEP. That's our first one. We did submit 3 more in the capital plan. We are now through most of the design, and we have a design recommendation to discuss with the school, and we're looking to arrange input sessions in September with all the key stakeholders, so we can work through the process of understanding the value of each equipment, how does it meet accessibility and inclusion, and what and how the whole project starts to look with respect to meeting everybody's needs. And of course, the idea is to complete it before March 31st, which is the expiry of the PEP program funding. Seismic ratings, SRG3. This is up here because Mike Ross has done a significant amount of work with the ministry to reassess our facilities over the summer, supporting 3 different engineering firms to review 91 blocks. And a block is a portion of a school that's built of a certain age. And so that work's now been done. Some preliminary results are in, and I believe I talked about that with respect to our capital plan submission. I think all the results are in. They haven't been all reviewed by the TRB, so we don't have the final summary, but it's apparent that the seismic ratings of our schools will change. Oh, and just the other day when I was doing the presentation up, somebody sent me this picture. The bleachers have arrived for the turf field. So these are the jointly purchased bleachers, and they'll be installed shortly. So Frank J. Ney, this is an aerial shot before the completion of the building in the background, but we had in fact completed the front turnaround area. Just a reminder, it's a 2-story, 10 classroom with an additional 18 parking stalls. And I wanted to again say thank you to everybody who participated. While I'm up here presenting, I started to list everybody, and I got to about 15 different departments and people, etc., that assisted, and then I realized I was going to offend somebody by leaving them off. That age-old problem. But a significant amount of participation from so many different stakeholders that again, I didn't want to mention them. Actual copy of the certificate of occupancy. People in facilities get really excited when those come in. And that was August 23rd, we finally got the occupancy date. We had started moving in before then, as we had substantial completion on July 20th. And of course we opened at startup. Here's an aerial shot just before school opened, so you can see the addition here on the right-hand side. Here's a shot facing south of the building. Again, not quite occupied yet, and a shot from the facing northeast. You can see the bounce wall has been repainted that used to be over on the other end of the building. Corridors, you can see here. And interesting, I went on a tour of this yesterday. I took a couple of additional pictures. here's, I'll skip ahead. Here's the classroom. They've been in it a week. You can't tell the difference between a classroom that's been occupied for 30 years at Georgia. They're all set up and operating. And so that's really exciting to see. Here's some of the collaboration areas. They're set up. At the time I was there, nobody was using them, but you can see the area facing south, just how large it is, how many tables they've got in that. So that's in the link area. Again, the classroom's all set up. The remaining work, normal project efficiencies, I won't list those. There's some additional works that were approved late in the program to classroom fitments the school felt were needed and millwork. And the playground set to arrive around September 24th and then installed shortly thereafter. Frank Janae, just as a reminder, the overall budget, 4.6 local capital, 1.9 ministry restricted capital, some from our energy initiative funding and some from our AFG to cover different, one was an upgrade of the heating system and the AFG was for some renovation work that went on in the main building. And I love this slide. We're taking a tour. You know the school is moved in and operating when the bike is chained up in the boiler room. So they're not in a week and they're feeling at home. So that's a good one. Any questions on Frank Janae?
Yeah, we have a question from Trustee Brennan.
Well, you've answered it actually with the cost. The original estimate was $5 million, and I guess it's just over 6 something for the final cost. But
yeah.
Kudos to the construction people who finished on time. It's quite a challenge.
Yeah, it was definitely a schedule-driven project, and there's lessons to be learned with respect to those types of implementations.
And just as a point of clarification, I think that the original project, the scope had changed because it was only going to be 8 general instruction classrooms, and after the class size and composition ruling came down from the Supreme Court, it was expanded to 10, if I'm correct. So I think that's in large part why the increase in the budget from the original.
And the cement.
I'm sorry? And the cement. Trustee Berzovich?
Yeah, no, it was a fault, sort of along the same lines. I was just trying to get a grasp of the difference in what we originally projected budget-wise compared to what it actually ended up costing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Are we gonna, yeah. Do we have that?
I haven't specifically been asked
Okay. Just
to
curious.
compare certain stages of the project, and that's of course possible. We have all the cost estimates, all the dates, all the activities that happen during the design process. So.
Okay.
Anybody else? So I wanted to thank you for your presentation.
Oh, I got one more.
Oh.
One more quick one, sorry. Questions on Frank Janae? I guess I went too quick there. So addition of the gym to a Cole Hammond Bay. That's a aerial shot courtesy NLPS drone #1, and Dale is the operator, and that's before the addition started. Again, it's 1.5 million local capital. We got started before we got a building permit. We had some discussions with the city, said we need to get going with this if we're going to get our construction window, and so we were doing that concurrently. Forecast within budget. There's a playground location to the lower field. There's an audio system upgrade that the school's very excited about, and it looks like we should be weather tight in October, completed for November. You can see here's another drone shot. Now we've advanced significantly. Roof trusses are not on yet, but they're on order and expected to be delivered. This doesn't look anything the same as we've relocated the playground. We're relocating it down to the lower playfield. Again, just another shot of what it might look like from the street. And now I'm finished.
Trustee Brennan, just the playfield, the lower playfield, will it be improved? It's not that, it's kind of scruffy the last time I looked at it. So.
The lower playfield at Hammond Bay?
Yeah.
There's no plans for any capital improvement. There are ongoing maintenance plans with respect to top dressing, overseeding, to improve playfields generally. That's a district program. The only change will be we'll eat a little bit into the playfield on the lower playfield with the playground relocation, but the school felt consolidating it was a better way to go.
And will the upper playfield still be able to be used for some activities?
The upper playfield remains untouched.
Trustee Robinson?
Yes, I was speaking with Dave Prevost today. I'm still trying to get my head around busing in Lanceville. and he said you were going to speak about it tonight. He was preparing some stuff for you.
Dave Prevost, he used to work for us, didn't he? Perhaps I'll refer that to the superintendent to get started if he wants to answer that. I have been reviewing the issue, but I believe that staff are having more discussions about that.
You're a day early. We're meeting tomorrow to rectify the situation and discover more and more about what's happening out there.
Yeah, I'm confused with what's going on, so that's great.
Yeah,
it's being looked after.
Any other questions? So I wanted to thank you for your presentation. I have to say that personally I enjoy the presentations you make after summer because it's very intriguing to learn about how your department and group actually does a year's worth of work in 3 months or 2 months in some cases, and how you juggle the AFG. When you've got shortages and you don't get people bidding on jobs, it's got to be a nightmare. So certainly appreciate and please extend on behalf of the board our thanks to everyone that's been working on all of this, because it's an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time.
Will do. Thanks for your kind words.
Sure.
And I'm really sorry to hear about Dave's departure.
He was last seen on a bus.
It was a yellow bus.
But it wasn't a yellow bus, yes. All right, so I will move on to 8.2. So Secretary Treasurer McVeigh's got a short laundry list of various, some of these are for information only. I think a couple of them need board votes, but I'll let her start.
Okay. So the first update is with regards to our VAST Satellite Learning Alternative Program that was opened at Woodlands, and Mr. Sabo did make some. Did I just say something that?
Oh, did you just say Woodlands?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I missed that. Out there for some months.
Sorry.
Okay,
I
sorry.
missed it.
Oh,
That's
okay. So just a quick update. Our Director of Planning and Operations, Sabo, did make some reference to the work that was done over the summer in relatively short order. I too am completely impressed by all of our departments. So again, in a very short period of time, finance, purchasing, facilities, pretty much moved a number of things aside in order to get the school fully operational. And I should have also mentioned HR and IT and learning services just all worked together over the summer to ensure that painting, floor replacement, equipment was ordered. There's a laundry list.
Oh yes, a big one was, sorry to interrupt, was Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi was fully up and ready, and we didn't think that it would be for September 4th for the start of school. So everything is on track. Our budget is almost fully committed at this point. An update from District Principal Brett Hancock indicates that we have 15 students that have transferred over to the school, and just as of yesterday, there were 3 new students to the district enrolled in the program, in the About program. So that's very positive. I don't know if Superintendent Saywell or Deputy Superintendent has anything to add to that.
That's good.
Okay, so, and we'll continue with updates. In respect of the SCC, again.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Trustee Solomon has a question.
Sure.
If you don't mind, but how many staff are assigned to the Woodland side at this stage of the game?
So we have the program being overseen by, again, District Principal Brett Hancock. And then in addition to that, we, out of the budget, provided for a coordinator. And I'm just looking at our Deputy Superintendent, Davey, for a moment. Just help me out if I have this incorrect. We have a teacher that moved over, so that was just a transfer from VAST. And we posted a new education assistant position out of the staffing. Clerical is being shared between the 2 sites, but I believe we've added some additional supports there as well. And that's pretty much.
We shifted a child youth family support worker as well.
Okay. And the other thing I should probably have mentioned is that through the summer, we had Aboriginal outreach workers working with various agencies, trying to get students connected to the program as well. Okay, so,
Thank you.
yeah. There was also a cost of busing to ensure that that's in place for students. With regards to the SCC, again, Mr. Sabo already made some comment about we're continuing to address space needs at all of our schools. We're continuing to organize classes. I believe Superintendent Sabo later on is going to comment on enrollment. I just thought I would remind everybody that we received our funding or our confirmed preliminary funding for classroom enhancement in mid-June. The funding this year is a little different than last year in that we have funding for overhead and we have funding for staffing, teacher staffing, but there is no more funding for capital in relation to the CEF or the Supreme Court of Canada decision. So that does have to come out of our local capital and likely will need to in the future. And in terms of the overhead funding that we received for additional custodial maintenance and some of the positions that we have, that funding is locked down, so we're not able to resubmit for any changes throughout the year. So it's just the staffing that we can resubmit, and hopefully additional divisions that are needed as a result will be funded. Any questions around that?
Trustee Brennan?
Secretary Treasurer, I'm just wondering, we have two things happening in the province, I guess. One thing is the sort of changes to class size and class composition in order to comply with the Supreme Court decision. And concurrent with that is a rise in babies and in migration, both from other parts of Canada and from other parts of the world. Do we distinguish between those? Are we able to? And secondly, if we are, then are we able to convince the province that we have facility costs directly related to the Supreme Court decision, notwithstanding the increases that are coming from natural growth?
Absolutely, would be the answer to that question, and it's incredibly onerous. But you're, in essence, asking me, can we distinguish the additional divisions, portables, that are required as a result of restoring the language, and can we then seek funding for that? Yeah. So last year, we did, and we made a submission, and we were able to get funding in the area of staffing, again, overhead, which encompassed a number of areas, and then in terms of portables, and again, Mr. Sable made reference to part of our ask, about $1 million worth, was missed at one point by the ministry, and we argued in order to get that was that additional 4 portables. Going forward, we can still distinguish which portables or space needs, renovations to rooms to create classrooms are associated but not necessarily funded. And that's the work that staff did last year. It's the work that we had a whole team in a boardroom today doing that work again as part of the best efforts requirements under the restored language. We go through the process of saying, okay, if we were to organize this school under the old language, according to the School Act caps, we would need 10 divisions. But in order to organize the class under the restored language, we would require, let's say, 12. And so we document that, we have our rationale, then we ask whether or not we have existing space, or if we need to add a portable, and it's all documented.
Because it seems to me that the adherence to the old language is a process that's not quite done. And if it's not done, it means we aren't in possession of all the space that we need to comply.
Completely.
So it also seems to me that it's patently unfair for the ministry to sort of close the door on any additional capital costs that are required as a result of compliance. So, I mean, maybe boards can advise the ministry of this difficulty.
Yeah, it really is a challenge, and it is important for us to be able to distinguish what is truly as a result of enrollment and what is as a result of the restored language. But at the end of the day, we're growing and we need more space.
Okay, thank you.
And more portables. And sorry, I might add to that, one of the things that we're doing with facilities right now is trying to get ahead of this a little bit better, and probably once we've settled the organization of classes and we're in October, we'll be coming to the board once facilities has done a review of what portables we might need for next year so that we're ordering them early. And like I said, we're just doing better planning and trying to get ahead of this.
Thank you.
Anything to add to that? Next in your agenda package is just for information, the independent review panel report out, re K-12 public sector, which is kind of a timely agenda item following that discussion. It's information from the independent review panel, just summarizing all the information that they heard when they went out and spoke with school districts. So I think you've all had an opportunity to read it in your package, but they address a lot of things, including capital, which really wasn't meant to be a focus of the review. It was more about the operating funding system.
Trustee Higginson.
Related to the funding model review, in July, I think it was July, my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, the minister put out an update on the process, and we'd kind of been wondering about the process, and in there was no guarantee that the local boards would have an opportunity to, you know, model or understand the implications of any recommendations that come out of the funding formula recommendations, and the committee has actually submitted their report to the minister. I don't know all the official processes, but I think it's with cabinet now, and there still has not been any movement from the ministry on the request from boards to be able to, you know, provide feedback on the proposed changes. So I'm just would like to. I just wondering if there's any opportunity for us to write a letter, or I guess I should have made a motion first, but I'll make a motion. Someone can second it that we. Can I not do that? No, fair enough. I feel like we need to think about, as a board, advocating for an opportunity to provide funding or provide feedback into any proposed changes of the funding formula before a final decision is made.
Thank you. Trustee Brenner.
The thing that hurt me in reading this was the short piece on special education. Mm-hmm. You know, the one statement, spending far in excess of supplemental funding. That's quite true, and particularly in this district where we're spending in millions of dollars more than we're receiving in funding just to provide service to students who may be on the fringes of eligibility. That the anxiety disorder, for example, is a very strictly defined behavior problem in the DSM-6, but it appears regularly in the classroom, and it may not be acute, but it is prevalent, and we spend money to provide support for teachers in the classroom for those students. So I think that they need to pay a little more attention to this issue and find solutions to the problems that exist where districts aren't funded for services that they choose to provide in order to ensure that students get the support they need. So I would hope that we would be able to respond to this very brief outline of special education with our own thoughts.
Any other questions or comments? Go ahead.
The next item is with regards to trustee remuneration and the annual CPI adjustment, which is on page 12 of your package. And the recommendation from staff is that the business committee recommend to the Board of Education, and I'm Ladysmith, that they approve the CPI adjustments to trustee remuneration effective September 1, 2018, which is in accordance with current board policy. And attached, and I believe on page 14, is what the CPI adjustment would look like in terms of actual salary for trustees and the chair.
Trustee Brennan?
I'd like to move an amendment to that the increases be adjusted to reflect the change in legislation that taxes the formerly untaxed portion of the trustee remuneration.
So you're moving the motion plus the,
I'm adding an amendment to the motion.
okay, I think we need to get the motion, we need a mover first. Do we not?
Oh, yeah, sure,
initial
sorry.
motion.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you're right, yeah.
Yeah. So can we get a mover for the motion as recommended?
I jumped the gun.
Trustee Burzbich, seconded by trustee Robinson. Do you want to speak to it at all?
I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Sure. And then you want to add your amendment now?
Yeah, and if it's, did the secretary get it? The motion or the amendment? Okay. It's just that,
Did you say it again?
well, it's just the change in taxation. We have a stipend that is not taxable. It reflects the sort of ancillary costs of being a trustee, driving and costs, et cetera. And previously it wasn't taxed. And now it's going to be taxed, which essentially will reduce the take-home pay of trustees commensurately. So I'm just wanting the increase, or the new cost, or the new remuneration to reflect that and be increased so that we're compensated for this reduction by the legislation.
So in short, we're not going to lose any money because of the legislation.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then we'll get a little bit of a bump up from the CPI.
Yes, exactly.
Any other discussion, trustee Burzbich?
I'm just trying to get a sense of what that would cost us to do that.
Pennies.
Okay.
Oh, we don't use pennies anymore, do we? Nickels.
Any other discussion?
If I can just pop in for a moment to that discussion. So as part of the other relevant information is exactly that. In January 2019, the legislative change will take place where all of trustee remuneration is taxed, and staff did do an analysis on the impact. And of course, it depends on the trustee what the impact is. It was anywhere from about $100 to $1,000 a year, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure that I have it on me. So we could amend it to adjust to reflect for that tax implication. It just might not be completely covered for all trustees, if that makes sense, because the impact was different based on the trustees' taxable income.
So just for clarification, so that trustees' actual earnings outside of their role as a trustee may have an impact on the actual dollar amount that we're talking about, and then it's difficult to take into account?
Correct, and unfortunately, I just don't have it at my fingertips because we were going to suggest that take place later. But if the motion is moved in that manner, staff could bring forward a recommendation for what that amount would be.
Trustee Solomon?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to vote against the amendment, not because I'm absolutely totally against it, it's just that what we're trying to do is compare with other districts, and I don't think we actually have that information in terms of the remuneration policy in other districts. I think you have a sense of it, but, and until we actually have that, perhaps we could approve, I would suggest that I would be supportive of approving the increase as such, and then get the further information with respect to the other districts and do a comparison analysis. And then perhaps add that amendment down the line. That would. So I'm going to vote against the amendment at this stage.
Okay, Trustee Higginson?
Yeah, I feel like we don't have enough information yet on the amendment. I'm not opposed to it. I actually think I brought it up during budget time as well and tried to get it, but I think it was just there was too many other things happening for it to get the attention that with everything else. So what I would like is to vote on the original recommendation, or I'll vote against the amendment. And then I will like to suggest later on that maybe we, like the Secretary Treasurer said, you're going to bring it to us. It sounds like they're going to address it soon. Yeah. So without having all the cost implications, it doesn't feel responsible to vote on it at this point, although I do agree it needs to be addressed. We've kind of been batting it around for a while, and it would be fair to
to trustees who are going to be impacted by this, that it get addressed properly.
Yeah, sure. Let's hear from Secretary Treasurer first.
The only thing that I'll add to the conversation is that I have surveyed, or BC ASBOs has surveyed what other boards are doing with regards to this issue, and I think they're feeling exactly the same way. They're a little apprehensive to address it at this point, partly because it's coming in January, but in part I think they're trying to see what other boards are doing, and therefore a number aren't doing anything. It's just a handful that have actually addressed the issue, but we can bring that back to you in terms of what that looks like.
So yeah, Trustee Rowley?
I think it might be prudent. I'm thinking about this one in some detail. It might be prudent to even ask the next group of trustees after a month or two to look at their workload and what time of day their closed board meetings are, and for them to look at their own remuneration, but to be informed of it early on, like I guess informed of it in their November meeting, that I guess they'd only have a month or so to think about it, but at least to think about it. Might be better for them to look at it than for us, because it seems like right at the end of our term to increase it, decrease it, or leave it the same. It's almost not our job in a way. Any other discussion before?
Well, I mean, I'm not wedded to this, but I do want to ensure that poorly paid trustees are not losing money in the end. And so I want that to be to happen. On the matter of the increase, I have to remind Trustee Solomon that we had examples from a number of districts of how much they were paid. All that information was made available to us at previous meetings. So to say that we don't know that, I mean, that's a little bit disingenuous, I think, because we do know that. We were given that information. And that's why we maintained the current practice, which was at an arm's length from the board and based on the consumer price index. So if this is defeated, I'm not going to go out and cry. I promise you that.
Okay, so on the matter of the amendment, all those in favor? Trustee Brennan is in favor. All those opposed? Yeah. Don't go off and cry. The amendment fails. So then let's take up debate on the main motion, which is the CPI increase. Is there any discussion regarding that? All of those in favor of the CPI increase? Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously. We're closed on the discussion.
I'd just like to move that in the November Business Committee meeting, the issue of the tax changes to the trustee remuneration is addressed and costed and understood, reported on. There doesn't have to be a recommendation, but feels like we've been batting this around for a while.
Point of order.
Sorry, you're right. Yep.
Point of
Get a
order.
seconder.
Can we do a motion now on that? Like it hasn't been
Well, I
brought.
think we need to ask staff if that's a reasonable.
Yeah,
part of
like maybe we haven't heard
Okay,
from
so-
staff.
So again, under other relevant information, staff were going to bring forward an impact analysis of the change to the new board. So you have our commitment that we will bring forward that impact on compensation.
Okay, that's.
So are you satisfied with that? You don't want to necessarily
Yep,
make a
if
motion?
that's the commitment, then that's good. It does feel like we've tried to kind of bat this around
Sure.
a bit.
Well, and
So,
it's
yeah.
kind of an awkward time because of the, we're ending term and there's a new
Yep.
board coming on board, right? So, okay.
Just as another information update, on Monday night, staff held a trustee information evening. We were very pleasantly surprised. I was there, Superintendent Saywell was in attendance, Deputy Superintendent Davey, and our Executive Assistant Karen Matthews, who really pulled it all together for us, were in attendance. There were I think 19 or 20 people that came, and I think we provided a good wholesome presentation in terms of information on what it is to be a trustee and governance and the role of staff. And I think it was well received. So just wanted to, and I believe the presentation that we provided is either on the website right now. Yeah, so it's on the website. And we brought up the trustee remuneration issue just so that anybody interested in running would be aware that this issue in January was going to be coming up and that we would look at it.
Don't take out a mortgage.
And new trustee orientation. So staff are already putting our minds to, although there is a BC STA Academy for new trustees, there's also that district orientation, and we're looking at November 1st from 3 to 5, and Saturday, November 3rd from 9 to noon to start doing some orientation with a new board. And then finally, if there are no questions about that, on page, what is it? 20 of your package is a recommendation for a policy change in respect of the inaugural annual meeting. The recommendation is that the business committee recommend to the Board of Education that you adopt policy 2.6 as presented, such that the date for holding the inaugural annual meeting is the first Monday after the 1st of November, and thereby ensuring that the policy is in keeping with legislative requirements for trustees holding office. Staff does not believe that this needs to go to 30-day consultation because really it's not open for debate. This is a legislation change, and we need to ensure that our policy is consistent with that legislation. So just looking for...
Trustee Brennan? Got a mover, seconded by Trustee Brzovic.
Just on that, it seems
Go
to
ahead.
be more procedural than policy.
Yes, yeah.
Exactly.
There's really no debate on it. So
We
all
have a
those,
requirement.
all those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Sorry, can you just repeat those dates for the new trustee orientation?
Sure.
November 1st and 3rd, is that what you said?
Yeah, and Ms. Matthews can correct me if I'm wrong. Thursday, November 1st from 3 to 5 p.m. and Saturday, November 3rd from 9 to noon. If we need to add some more dates, we can, but at least we've slotted some time aside.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to 8.3, Super Saywell.
Thank you. Just another quick update. I did an education meeting last week, and I want to give you an update on enrollment and where we are with staffing. So in the education meeting, I reported that the week previous to that we had 110 new registrations. This week we have 21 new registrations, and which has resulted in the addition of new divisions to 6 schools: Gabriola, Departure Bay, Randerson Ridge, Pleasant Valley, Rock City, and North Oyster. 2 of those sites will also receive portables. I spoke earlier about Ecole North Oyster receiving a portable, and the Departure Bay, we're looking at placing a portable there as well. All but 7 of our elementary schools are organized into divisions now. So kids are in the class they will be for the remainder of the year. And Mr. Davey was late this evening because he was working on organizing those other schools with staff. Teacher staffing, last round of postings closed last week, September 7th. That was, I reported at the Education Committee, 471 postings this year for the new year. Still working on filling a few assignments, and principals are busy interviewing for those jobs. Next round of teacher posting goes out tomorrow with some presently unfilled assignments in a couple of interesting areas that we haven't had shortages in before: social studies and PE, and English and ELL. some of which is due to an increase in enrollment. And I think you're up to date, unless you have any questions.
I have a question regarding, so all but 7 of the elementary schools have been placed into divisions, and I'm hearing a little bit of chatter about some parents who are wishing to move their children for various reasons between classes, and apparently hitting some resistance. Is there a sort of district-wide policy regarding this? Are there some barriers to some flexibility in this regard, or how is that being handled sort of at the?
I might refer to Mr. Davey. He's been doing the lion's share of this work. But generally those class placement is done by the school, and they meet with teachers, and they put students in the classes where they think they'll be served best. Occasionally, parents would like their son or daughter in a different class, and we deal with those appeals as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just referring to the 7 schools that do not have their classrooms organized, are you able to share which schools those are?
Sure. Sure. Through the chair. So the 6 schools that Mr. Sable referred to in terms of additional divisions, those are 6 of the 7, and then McGirr Elementary at this point, we're still going through and taking a look at additional students that moved into the area, and also at kindergarten siblings that may not have been able to be placed into the school. So that's the work that we've been doing today.
Any other questions? Trustee Berzovich?
Thank you. Do we have an estimation on how long it'll take for those last 6 or 7 schools to get?
We're meeting as a committee tomorrow.
Okay.
With recommendations coming forward from the work that took place through the day today.
And a follow-up, if I may?
Sure.
Are there any students that don't have a school at the moment?
There are, what I recall, I think 23 students who are late registrants, who may have come in just as registrants this week, that central registration is still working through. But we don't anticipate that there will be problems in terms of placement. There just may be documentation and so forth that's still required before placement is finalized.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Trustee Brennan.
Trustee Brennan?
Thank you, Chair. The Canadian Parents for French sent us out a letter indicating some serious shortages of French teachers in some districts. My question is, I know we experience difficulties in recruitment. I just wonder if we are experiencing difficulties in placement. And secondly, the province released money for the development of more French language education programs at the post-secondary level, so that we can produce more homegrown French immersion teachers. I just wondered if BIU was one of those, and whether we have had any discussion with the education faculty at BIU about them starting to turn out teachers with that ability to work in our district.
Yeah, they don't presently, as you know, and I'm not sure if they're planning to. We have been, we've gone to some different areas to do some recruiting, and we've been very successful in the last little while. We're in better shape than a lot of districts, of course, because we're still quite attractive. You can still perhaps buy a house in Nanaimo. And so...
get a tent.
And so I'm not sure about the last round of postings, if we have some French immersion postings in that. I don't know if you know, Mr. Davey.
I don't.
Yeah.
The only thing I would add to that as well is that one of the challenges we have with French immersion teachers is that sometimes they will opt for an English-speaking classroom assignment as well. So they're not necessarily strictly hired just to teach French. Yeah.
And it's interesting, 11% of our student population is in French immersion, so that's a significant number.
Right.
Trustee Bob?
Oh, thank you. I was just wondering if there was increase or decrease in students coming from abroad.
Oh, I can't answer that.
Too soon to tell.
Yeah. We'll do some statistical analysis at the end of September, and we'd be able to give you numbers around total increased enrollment and where they're coming from, and those sorts of things.
Any other questions for the superintendent? Okay, so seeing none, we'll move on to, we have no correspondence referred from the regular board meeting, but we'll move on to item 10.1, Secretary Treasurer McVeigh again, regarding the operating surplus and deficit policy and the restricted items from our surplus of 2017 and 18 that have been restricted.
Okay, so the reason that we're bringing this forward right now is it's something that we are going to do as a practice in advance of the audited financial statements coming to the board for approval. So our Director of Finance, Jetta Holmes, is here this evening to answer any questions and to go through our restricted items on the surplus, which is on page 30 of the agenda package.
Notwithstanding the fact that the policy is still in process of being approved, we want to move forward with kind of best practices around bringing the surplus and the restrictions forward to the board for your review and discussion ahead of it being presented as part of the audited financial statements. The auditors also like to hear that you've looked at this and that any direction you may have given is reflected in the restricted surplus note. So looking at that, it's on page 63 of your package. You'll see in there that the accumulated surplus is broken out into the operating fund and the capital fund, and it's really looking at the operating fund restrictions that we need some direction or some review by you. There's really two subcategories there. The first is the internally restricted and the staffing or unusual expenses reserve. That's really a contingency reserve. It's looking at amounts that have been put aside for unforeseen circumstances that may arise with respect to staffing, replacement costs, and then we also have the employee payroll tax that's been introduced by the province, for which the funding has not been confirmed. So we're really being very conservative here by putting that estimated additional cost aside in the restricted surplus. If at the end of the day it's not required or the province confirms that they will provide funding for that, we would pull that back out of that contingency reserve because it wouldn't be needed. So you'd see that reflected in the amended budget come January, February. The second section within that internally restricted is our targeted or constraints reserve. Really, those are amounts that are arising because of the June 30th year end of our fiscal year. If not for kind of that date or line in the sand, these projects would be ongoing and we would continue and complete those projects. It's because we need to measure it at June 30th that we need to say, these are projects that are ongoing. Mr. Sabo referred to some of those projects earlier. Those are things that get started in June, AFG projects, just because of that tight timeline that continue on over the June 30th year end. So these amounts are brought to you for your attention, but they are mostly not contingent type reserves. There are things that we have legal commitments to, we've issued purchase orders for, and I'll just refer you to 3 items that are really at the board's direction that are projects that are going ahead. The first is the funding of the community school coordinators for another year. So that's an amount that has been set aside and is reflected in the budget. The Woodlands site was a $300,000 budget that was approved. Again, showing that as restricted because it was brought out of last year's funding and surplus, that we want to show that that was being spent kind of over that same time frame. And the other is that within that facilities projects, which is a total of $797,000, there's $150,000 restricted in there with respect to the playground projects. So just so that you know, that money has been set aside waiting for that project to get going. And as Mr. Sabo referred to, there was a lot of urgent kind of items that came into play. And so that is still sitting there and ready to be expended when that goes ahead. So These items are there to bring highlight to them so that the board knows those projects that you approved in last year's budget are carrying on and will be completed. But we would expect that these funds would be expended in the 18-19 year, and they would be reflected in the amended budget when that comes to you. As a matter of process then, we would typically bring this to you ahead of the audited financial statements. You'll note though that there's still unrestricted operating surplus. As we move forward with the implementation of the new surplus and deficit policy, we would then bring to the board in the fall, prior to the development of the amended budget, suggestions for implementing those contingency reserves that are in the policy. So things like capital project replacement or other items that you may just kind of rainy day type funds want to put amounts towards your goals that are outlined in terms of percentages of operating expenses. Put those amounts in those reserves, which we haven't started to do yet with the exception of that staffing reserve. So in the charts that were provided in your package, you'll see that there's some trend charts that show some lines of the maximum that was recommended by the policy and the minimum. And this is how we're just starting to implement this policy. But for most of the reserves that are in the policy, we haven't brought that forward for your consideration to put any monies in there yet. And that would be something that we would bring forward in the fall, typically every year, once the audited financial statements are done and you know how much unrestricted surplus you have to consider. And so that's really just kind of a conservative financial management process that obviously has been recommended by the province in terms of that financial governance recommendation. And we're just getting started on that now. So this is really the first piece that would typically come forward to you. Any questions on any of that?
Rob, sir?
Yeah, okay. And as I started in this was the last time at the budget meetings, and I spoke to asking for certain things that need to be done and how big of a surplus do we have to have. And once again, well over 7 million. Last year was over 5. Previous year, the previous years, and the previous year. On the back page, those surpluses, may they be restricted or not, have always been in the range of $5+ million. And we look at the needs of, can we afford to do certain things, and is there the ability to pay? And this may be whatever you want, but my question is 2.62 million unrestricted surplus, and then the local capital is 6 million. Where does the $6 million come from for the local capital? Was that money that was placed at the beginning of the year from surpluses that was rolled in by board direction, or is that money that is a surplus, but it's in local capital as a surplus? Through the chair to...
I'll actually ask our Director of Finance to address that.
Okay, one thing to point out here is that, so speaking to the local capital piece specifically, that's an accumulated amount. And so yes, the board does approve certain transfers to local capital every year from operating, for example, for our technology plan. Typically, local capital is only increased by sales of capital assets. So this was the year where we did see some sales, right, of the NDSS lands as well as Claytree. And so that's why we have had an increase in that local capital piece. Now, some of those funds did get spent on some projects as well. I think what's important in the local capital piece, and the board does discuss putting monies aside there, is that in this time of increasing enrollment, we're going to be looking at some of these capital needs as some of those classroom additions and such are not funded. And so it is an important thing for the board to consider going forward on that. But local capital does just either increase by specific direction of the board to transfer an amount in there that may be related to a future project, or by sales of capital assets.
Yeah, I'm going to add a little bit to that because I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different direction. So when you look at the local capital and you see 2018 and 2017, there's not very much difference between those two numbers. However, there's been a lot of flow in and a lot of flow out. And the reason why is because when we sold the Rotary Bowl and the Shrocksman Stadium to the city of Nanaimo, approximately $3 million flowed into that account. When we sold Claytree, I don't know, approximately $1 million or 750 or whatever the sale was for, flowed into that account, the local capital account. But what flowed out of that account was the work that was being done at, or part of the work that's being done at Frank J. Nay and some of the work that's being done at Hammond Bay. So what you don't see is the flows in and the flows out. But to answer your question, most of the money that's in the local capital came from sales of properties and that kind of thing. And there have been some instances where we've taken accumulated surplus and applied that to local capital, but that's generally not the case. And the other comment that I wanted to make, two really on this. One is the restricted surpluses, especially not the contingencies, but the targeted constrained reserve. Those are monies that are in the surplus currently that are working for us, that have been earmarked to be put towards supports for students and money into the district. And the other comment that I'll make, and it's in the policy for the operating surplus deficit policy for the board bit. There's some guiding principles in there. And I think one of the most important guiding principles that trustees can keep in mind when they look at accumulated surplus, it's on page 40 of 66. And under those guiding principles, I'm looking at the third bulleted item that's in there. And it says, although surpluses, accumulated surpluses and contingencies can be a source of cash for one-off spending, they cannot sustain ongoing or recurring services. And so I think it's very important to note that these surpluses, this accumulated surplus is a one pot pile of money. And it would be a big mistake if we hired people with it. Because if we run into a deficit situation and we blow through our contingencies, we're going to be hurting the next year. And we won't be able to sustain those positions, and they'll end up having to be cut. Trustee Routley.
I don't get you, because the total maybe you could just clarify after I ask the question. The Secretary Treasurer, the total operating surplus, right, that Rob was talking about. So let's say, let's just pick a year, well, 7 million this year. Part of that, so that's the surplus after we've spent money on district programs that we've found important, that we've funded.
I'm not sure if I understand the question completely.
Well, because what Trustee Kimler was saying was that out of that operating surplus amount, we spend additional on operations.
Do you want to?
Well, yeah, sure, I'll clarify because I made the comment. So when you look at an accumulated surplus, it consists of restricted and unrestricted.
Well, no, but that wasn't my question. My question was just in regards to the year. Like, just take a year as a snapshot.
Sure.
So the 7 million, this is total operating surplus. Is that 7 million of operational dollars that's in surplus after we've spent all of our money on operations?
For clarity, are you referring to the graph that's gray, orange, and blue?
Yes.
Yes. So if you look at that graph, you'll see the gray portion represents the unrestricted operating surplus. The red part represents the restricted surplus, and it's the restricted surplus that we've already earmarked for expenditure.
Oh, so the unrestricted would be like well over 2 million.
It's 2 point. Yeah, we just saw it in the
something.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right. And the blue. I need my glasses.
Well, not necessarily, because the restricted staff.
Yeah, that's the contingency fund.
But that's a reserve that showed surplus. So then that would be in addition.
That's our insurance policy, because we anticipate that we're going to have staffing issues throughout the year, and we don't want to be surprised by that. So we've set aside contingencies just to take care of that, and we draw from those during the year as they're needed, and then we'll top that back up at the end of at budget time next year.
But then this graph is wrong, because then for 2017 per se, then that money would be spent. It wouldn't be a surplus then.
So at the end of every year, if there is money left over, you have an annual surplus. If you have monies left over from year to year. You have an accumulated surplus. I think one of the points that was trying to be made is that in the restricted surplus, the targeted constraints reserve that Ms. Holmes was making reference to are all the various programs, services that need to be restricted because they will be spent in the 18-19 year. So $2.5 million of that surplus, of that $7 million surplus, will be spent on staffing, services. They will be spent because we restricted it, because we simply couldn't spend it in the 17-18 fiscal year. So does that make? So
Yeah.
$2.5 million
there's
is
still
going back into operations, in essence.
But there's still the unrestricted operating surplus. which
Correct.
is
So
in the
that
earmarks.
would be truly the contingency, right? That would be if something were to go wrong and the school district needed to draw upon funds, we would have that unrestricted operating surplus of $2.6 million to draw upon, and then we have that smaller contingency that's restricted for staffing or replacement costs if they were to escalate.
Well, no, I get that, but then if you look at the unrestricted for each of those years and then add up those amounts, we're saving for a rainy day every year huge amounts of money.
Yes, I'm just simply explaining the policy. I'm not going to debate it with you. The board can certainly do that.
I'm asking
Miss-
the question just
Miss-
for the other trustees in the room.
Ms. Holmes had another.
Well, maybe I could just offer a clarity. If you're looking at that chart that is the gray, orange, blue, the gray amount in each year is the accumulated amount. It's not the amount that's set aside each year. So it shouldn't be the gray that's in 2014 added to the gray that's in 2015 and accumulated that way. You'll see in 2014, in fact, the gray looks quite a bit larger than what was left in 2015. And that's because in those years, that was before our whole becoming sustainable financially was a goal of the board. And we were using those unrestricted funds to fund current operations. And so that unrestricted portion was being drawn down by current operational needs. Now, the kind of thought is that, and it's best practices, that you use your unrestricted surplus for one-time events or unforeseen events that come up, not for regular ongoing operations. But you can see the trend there that that gray piece did go down because we were at that time using it to basically balance the budget.
And had we not done that, we would have been in a deficit situation.
Definitely, yeah.
Trustee Higginson?
Thanks. So just on a couple of notes, I do note that if we look at the chart, this popular chart, the gray, orange, and blue, that we have, two anomalous years in there, 2014 and 2018. And I think if we think about what was happening in 2014, that was the year that we had the labor dispute. And then in 2018, this was the year that we were implementing the Supreme Court, like for the first full year. So I think the public accounts that were posted a couple of weeks ago showed that this sector had actually, I think, I didn't do it, I should probably be careful when I use these numbers, but I think it was the second highest operating surplus amongst the sectors in the province. And I think we haven't had time, because these numbers are just coming in, to drill down. But when I think about it, we were staffed. We were given a budget to hire teachers, and we were pretty good at our hiring. So we didn't leave a lot of money on the table, but some of the teachers' positions weren't hired. So some of that money stayed on the table. I think also something that's happened, and it may or may not, and maybe this is a good thing that we could do, is kind of drill down a little bit on our district and why we, what the situation was this year, but also my understanding, and the Secretary Treasurer can correct me if I'm wrong, and also our NDTA President, that we're given money based on an average teacher salary for staffing. And then we went out and hired a whole bunch of sort of beginning of the career teachers. So if we're given money on an average teacher salary that's sort of about the middle of the teachers' careers, but we actually hire a bunch of people who are at the beginning of their careers, we're going to end up with money left over at the end of the year. And I'm not even sure if the ministry has decided yet, but I do remember there was some discussion at the end of the year last year during our business committees, my colleagues can help refresh my memory, that money may get clawed back. So some of this money may or may, I don't know if they've decided over the summer what they're doing, but some of this money may or may not even be available for us to spend. So what we're seeing here are some big numbers. But I think if we look back historically, these big numbers are also reflected in other anomalous years where there was anomalous staffing events happening. And so it would be, I think, prudent of us to try to understand a little bit of where that came from. I think that is a good thing for us as a corporate board to do, to understand those numbers. And perhaps going forward, when we do receive our audited financial statements and have those meetings with the auditors, those are questions we can ask, is for that to be broken down a little bit so we can understand it. Because to you know, Mr. Zvere's point, we do need to be careful about accumulating these things, because it doesn't make us look very good when we're asking for more money from the ministry every year and leaving money on the table every year. So we have to balance that very well. But I would argue that this past year is just it was a bonkers year, and everybody's trying to figure it out. So I would like us to understand it a little better, though.
And in this past year, for all the reasons that we've talked about tonight in the various presentations, the targeted constraints reserve is much larger than in previous years, because we did have funding and projects that we needed to get done, and we simply didn't have the resources and the time to get those projects accomplished, and that therefore they have been targeted. And the plan is to have that done in the 18-19 year. So it is a bit larger than usual. The other thing I want to emphasize again is that from a finance perspective, I think I personally, and Jetta could probably add to this, am pleased to see that it's a little higher than normal, and that we do need to take a look at our local capital surplus and accounts in terms of whether or not there will be a recommendation, or the board does want to consider transferring some of that surplus into local capital. Again, the ministry has indicated that they're not going to be funding any additional capital associated with CEF, and at the same time we have inclining enrollment. We are going to need to look at our space needs, and without question we are going to have to ensure that we are capable of funding it, because the ministry at this point isn't.
Trustee Brennan?
Yeah, just two things. Just following up on what the Secretary Treasurer said, the ministry has taken a different view of responsibility for funding capital projects by requiring districts to pay a portion of the cost out of their own funds, to wit, the money that we had to pay for the addition at Frank J. Ney. That was all our money. Even the money that was surplus to the Wellington project, that was still, I think, our money. So we paid for that. The ministry didn't kick in anything. And the gym at Hammond Bay, we're paying for that out of local capital. So when we're looking ahead at the space needs, the facilities needs for this district, which are going to be substantial in the near future, we have to have money in our own budget so that we can put up some of our funds to not match. I don't think we'll be able to really match the ministry funds, but at least provide a portion of the cost of new school construction. I think the Belmont School, new Belmont School in Souk, they had to pay, I think, $25 million out of the cost. Anyway, a large amount through sale of land. So that is going to be ongoing, and it's going to be a consistent requirement of us to have some savings in our capital so that we can contribute to new school construction or additions. Secondly, so that makes sense to have as much as we can get there so that we can convince the ministry that our projects are necessary and that we are contributing our own share to it. The second thing is on the targeted constraints reserve. You'll notice the chair mentioned from the guiding principles that those funds should not be used for continuing programs or services. And what we're doing for 1 year, it is likely, is paying for the community school coordinators. Well, that puts a lot of pressure on this district to, within this year, to do a review of the community schools' role in this district and their costs and benefits. And because of the guiding principle saying, you ain't going to be able to do this year in, year out, we're doing it for 1 year, and future boards may decide we're going to do it forever, which goes against the principles. Or they'd kick it into the operating budget. But it does call upon the board to examine the community schools within this year to see if they are needed and what role they play and what costs and benefits we get from them. So, I think this is prudent as far as I'm concerned, particularly having a surplus in the operating budget, because there are unforeseen costs that in the past we've been required to pay electricity, hydro costs, for example, 25% increase in hydro costs, and no increase in funding for that purpose. A bad winter, for example, with a lot of snow shoveling, that can also be a cost. So I think it's a prudent budget. I think it's nice to be able to be in a situation where we're not having to close schools and cut programs and lay off teachers and support staff. So I'm happy with this.
Trustee Rowland? And that's the other thing I was going to mention, looking at this, is that the capital surplus, I would say, like, that amount is, when you look at, if we have an earthquake in this region, there's schools where they're seismically unsafe. And to me, that number, looking at 52 million of accumulated, is really, really sad. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, I'm glad we put that money aside for future school projects. I say that's for future governments to look at, like we're doing the ask for NDSS. That's a capital ask. So I would rather see us use some of that money to make our schools safe and to bring that down. I agree that maybe somewhere between where it is and zero would be prudent, but when it gets to that amount, and we have schools that could actually kill kids, right? And it would be that school, the seismic safety of that school, that could result in loss of life. Should be looked at.
Yes. So that we get facts straight. That investment in tangible capital assets, which is $46 million out of that capital surplus, is not ready cash. I think that it's important to know that.
Yeah, thank you for your clarification, because that's an important point. Secretary Treasurer?
The other thing I just want to clarify is that, as Director of Planning and Operations has expressed, all of our seismic ratings are in the process of being reviewed. And I don't know that you can comment on what funding might be associated with that or not, because I think that's yet to be determined. Are you able to comment on that? But I guess the other thing I just wanted to clearly say that we would not be housing students in schools that we thought were unsafe. And I think that needs to kind of go on record. Yes, we have some serious issues with regards to seismic, and the ministry has taken that initiative to make the island a priority, and we're in the process of doing that, but I wouldn't want people to be left here thinking that we would in any way house students in schools that were unsafe.
Thank you. Just to add, the ministry's program for seismic upgrading is voluntary on their part, and it is a seismic bridging program where they're trying to bring schools up to building code, where technically, like your home, when the code changes, you don't have to upgrade seismically. So the ministry has indicated that health and safety and seismic are one of their highest priorities, and that the lion's share of the capital program will go towards seismic priorities. They're not quite sure how these new ratings are going to work into sort of the current approvals and future approvals, but my sense is if you have a number of high priority schools, then you'll get some consideration from the ministry for funding to address those.
Trustee Higginson?
Sorry, I really, because it is, the way it's worded can be confusing. I just really want to make sure that we also don't leave the table thinking, like Trustee Brennan said, that investment in tangible capital assets that's stuff. That's actual asset stuff. So it's not money that's sitting in the bank anywhere. the only money is the local capital 6.3. So that is a requirement of accounting to report it out that way, but this is actually like stuff, not money. So there's 6.3 or almost $6.4 million, not $52 million.
Correct. Trustee Robinson, did you have your hand up, or were you just scratching your head?
I'm just scratching my head.
I have a.
Figured all
I have a suggestion to make to our finance department with respect to the graphs, and specifically the one that appears to be so.
Popular?
Yes, popular is a good word. Popular tonight. And the comment is that it's not normalized to the budget for that particular year, and instead it's fixed dollar amounts. And the reason I bring this up is because the school district budget for the year 2014 was on the order of $114 million for the year, whereas for 2018 we're now talking about a budget with the class size and composition increase of approximately $150 million. So there's quite a bit of difference, and the policy itself with respect to surplus and with respect to deficit deals in percentages of our total budget, and it may be instructional, in addition to having a graph that shows the fixed dollar amounts, that you also include a graph of percentage based on of the total budget, if you follow what I'm meaning. Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? So I guess we'll see the full-blown thing next month. Going back to our agenda, we have no new business. We have no for information. There are some questions. I will let Greg Keller go first, because I've seen his. If you can vet those, that'd be good.
Future Kimler. So I think you may have answered part of the first question, but I'll ask it anyway. So what's the total cost of Frank-Ney addition, and specifically, how did the school district fund the construction of the addition? And I'm looking to know the value of the request made to the Ministry of Education for the capital project, as well as the amount of new capital funding that was approved by the ministry, and where the balance of the funding came from.
So I'll answer that a little bit in part because I've answered it to you in an email already. We saw the amounts that I think Mr. Sable put up from his PowerPoint presentation, which will be made available on the website or added to the agenda, as well as coming out in the SD 68 news. So I had replied to you that I didn't know the exact cost for the addition, partly because the scope of the project increased after the Supreme Court of Canada decision regarding class size and composition was announced. I believe 2 more general instruction classrooms were added to the expansion plan, increasing it from 8 to 10. The original cost was forecast to be $5 million, as Trustee Brennan had pointed out. The PIR, or the Project Identification Report, which is what it was called at the time we made our submission, I think it's now a PDR, was submitted to the ministry and would have been included the whole entire cost of the project, which was estimated at $5 million. So, if you will, our ask to the ministry would have been for the full amount. We normally just submit a PIR for the dollar amount, and then after vetting the business case for the plan, the ministry would have indicated how much that they were willing to kick in, if anything at all. And the business case for the plan was basically that we either needed X amount of money to refurbish Rutherford Elementary, or we needed $5 million to build a new wing at Frank J. Ney. So the ministry approved the business case, but apparently, from my understanding of events, had already spent its capital funding allocation for the year. But as Trustee Brennan had pointed out, the Ministry of Education funded Frank J. Ney in an unusual way, in that they reallocated the contingency funding left over from Wellington's secondary seismic upgrade project and channeled it directly into the Frank J. Ney expansion. Now, Trustee Brennan argues that that's essentially our money, but normally it would have gone back into a pool of money that the ministry had. So I was a little bit disappointed personally that they didn't fund a greater share. I understood that they wanted to, but could not. But I did take it as a positive sign that they did approve the business plan and cut through the red tape to work with our school district. The district funded the remainder of the project from local capital, which again is money from the sale of the Rotary Bowls, Roxman Stadium, for example. And the local capital is used to fund expansion, retrofits, other major capital maintenance projects as recommended and voted upon by the school board. So I don't know, do you have anything to add to that or to correct in that?
That's a lot of information. Not off the top of my head. There were a few things I might state maybe a little differently, but as I said, we probably have to sit down and look through it in more detail to provide.
And did you get the numbers when he?
Yes, thank you for your response. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And if I may, just one follow-up question. So from what I heard, we didn't get any new capital funding. So just to reiterate how you responded, we reallocated funding that we received from Wellington through approval through the Ministry of Education for use on the addition at Frank.
So just for clarity, had we not put the ask forward to the ministry, that the extra money from the Wellington seismic project would have gone back into the ministry.
Yep.
And would have been distributed to some other school district for some other project.
Good.
So in essence, I mean, even though it is new money in a sense, it just came from in a creative manner.
Okay, so my follow-up question, if I could just read it,
Yes.
sorry.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Sorry.
I think that Pete was just going to add to clarification on that.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
And I hope I got this correct, it's been a while, but the ministry during the construction of Wellington asked the district to contribute some ministry reserve towards the project. And we agreed to contribute the district agreed to contribute $3 million toward a ministry reserve. And ministry reserve is ministry capital funding that's held by the district, but the ministry indicates how it should be spent. I believe that's the case.
Ministry
Restricted.
restricted funds.
Right.
Yes, are ministry restricted, and therefore we have to, if we want it released, we have to seek approval for that. Is that what you're making
Yes.
reference to? And the $1.3 million that was left over from the Wellington project
Would go back into the ministry reserve.
would have gone back into the ministry reserve.
For us to work with the ministry as to a future likely seismic project that
Right.
we would put it towards.
And the reason it went from 1.3 to 1.9 is we had some other ministry restricted funds that we wrote to the ministry and asked to have released to local capital as well.
So just one follow-up, if that's okay?
Sure.
So I'm just curious, at what open meeting and by what staff was it decided that based on the letter received from the Capital Delivery Branch of the Ministry of Education that was dated January 24, 2017, that the ministry approve access to $1.3 million of restricted capital funding meets the spirit and intent of the Rutherford Elementary School closure bylaw. Motion 2015-06 carried on December 2nd, 2015, and why was the closure not revisited by the board as per the board motion if capital funding for the project was not approved? So for your convenience, I'll just read you that motion. So be it resolved that the Board of Education of School District 68, Nanaimo Ladysmith, permanently closes Rutherford Elementary School, 5840 Hammond Bay Road, Nanaimo, BC, V9T6M6, facility number 068077, on June 30th, 2017 or later, subject to the completion of a new wing at Frank J. Ney School. In the event capital funding is not approved for the Frank J. Ney construction, or construction is delayed, that it is not expected to be complete by September 2018, the issue of the closure of Rutherford Elementary will be revisited by the board. So this is the question I posed, and we did not receive the funding that we applied for. We didn't get any new money. We got approval to redirect existing funds, which in my mind, I'm just trying to figure this out. So where did that decision come from to determine that that was consistent with the motion?
Without being able to take a look through our agenda packages and the various meetings that we held, I don't know that I'm prepared to be able to answer that question, so it might take time for us to take a look at that. Off the top of my head, I honestly don't know that I could speak to the date. And back to the funding question, in our view, that was ministry's contribution to the project. And they could have simply said with regards to Wellington, no, the project was under budget and you can't have that money. But so if we can get back to you with regard to the meeting, we can certainly look that up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there are some other questions. Check this box if you'd like to ask your question.
She would like to read it.
So you have two questions that you would like to read.
Oh, okay, so I'm just.
And they are agenda items? Or?
Both of them are agenda items, yes.
Okay.
Okay. I'll pass them because I don't remember what I wrote. Thank you. Oh, you mean one at a time?
Well, sorry, you can have the other one as well.
Thank you. Okay, the first one has to do with the trustee remuneration. And my question is, has anyone researched the rationale for the trustee remuneration, citing that every September the board was to receive an increase based on the Vancouver CPI? What was the result and who was consulted?
I can give you my initial answer to that question. I believe it was last year, 2017, that a rather in-depth report was provided to the Board of Education, providing some comparisons to other school districts and revisiting whether or not the board wanted to compare themselves to other school districts in terms of compensation and use an average of like-sized districts, or to continue with the policy to increase by the CPI. And the board, in an open board meeting, made the choice to stick with the CPI. I personally can't speak to why it originated that way, but it was also part of our package to the board.
So if I may, if you will indulge me, I'm the only person in this room who actually knows what happens.
Ah, okay.
So, and I was the only person in the room last time too. Yes.
Yes, you did.
So this was done because every time remuneration came up, there was so much controversy around it. We had also consulted with all of our stakeholder groups, and they were in favor of us having some kind of increase. But then, of course, you get a lot of feedback and everything. So Trustee Allen came up with the idea that we just be tied to the CPI. But the reason for doing that was so that we never ever had to discuss it again. It just happened on September the 1st. It was automatically done. It was never ever brought to the board again to talk about. It was just an increase that was done across the board. And sometimes it was a little tiny bit. Sometimes it was 1%. You know, we just never knew what it was. So that's why I asked, did you know a little bit more about it? Because, as I said, there isn't a single person here that knows what happened other than me. So that's why I asked the question. Because it seems it's so that it's not difficult for trustees to have to justify getting an increase when it is tied to the CPI, which a lot of companies tie their increases to. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Sure. Trustee Higginson?
So normally it's just the chair who answers questions, but since we seem to have slipped a bit from process tonight and allowed someone to answer their own question, I am going to say that I personally did understand that, and I am somebody in the room who does understand it, and we actually did as a board talk very clearly about this last year, that we felt as a board the fact that it was just happening regularly was not transparent. So we as a board last year did vote to make it a transparent thing that happened every year at the same time, based on a very sound recommendation for all the reasons that you just said. It is a very controversial issue for boards to have to deal with, But we did decide last year that we thought it should be happening a bit more of a transparent process based on the report that the Secretary Treasurer was just talking about. That was the decision that was made. So that is why it came to the board for a vote, because it does happen every single year. It's in the policy that it happens every year. But we decided we wanted to make it a little bit more public because it felt more transparent that way. So there are people in the room who do know what's going on, do understand the history of it, and just made a slightly different decision for a transparency reason. That's all.
Well, if I may just.
No, the point of question period is to ask clarifying questions, not politic.
It is a clarifying question. May I go on to the next one?
Please.
So regarding the Woodlands program, what was the cost to reopen portion of the school? I know the budget was $300,000, but how much was actually spent on the reopening of the school, that portion?
The total spent to date, I happen to have this in front of me, the total spent to date from local capital is just over 83, almost 84,000. And yes, it does include a small amount for busing that we thought we needed to include. That I don't know that I have in front of me. And then the larger part is committed in salaries, right? So it's committed but not necessarily spent. But just to get the school up and running in terms of the capital piece.
Okay, because that sort of answers some of the other parts of the question that I was asking, so I just need to clarify. So the $300,000 that you have budgeted for was not only to do the renovation to reopen the part of the school, but it included the staff costs, which included the temporary and the shared costs, as well as the busing.
Correct.
Okay.
And so far we're within budget, and it was a notional amount that we put forward to the board that we thought we would need in order to get going, bearing in mind that it was done in a very short period of time. So whether or not that will need to be adjusted going forward, that would be up to the board.
Okay, is there any breakdown in that? You know, this was spent on the building, this was spent on the staffing, full-time staffing, the temporary staffing, the shared staff. This is the cost for busing.
I'm just looking to see whether I happen to have that information readily available. The 83, almost 84,000 that I quoted you really was equipment, painting, flooring, just the stuff that was more the capital piece. And the rest of it has been committed towards staffing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sorry, no, we have a few more questions. And Charlene McKay, would you like to come up and read your questions as well?
Should we get the questions back from Terry?
Yes.
Ms. Saunders, could we
I
have
guess
your...
you need it.
Yeah.
I was just going to stick it in my purse with everything else.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. My first question is regarding the Lanceville to Dover Bay bus route review. Upon completion of the route reviews, how much time passed before the parents of the courtesy riders were advised of the changes where they would no longer be allowed to take that bus?
I'll have to defer to staff on this.
Okay. Maybe what I'll do, if you don't mind, is just continue and then I'll close, because I don't think you're going to be able to answer me today, and that's okay. So the Lanceville to Dover Bay, how much weight was given to the safety of students, no sidewalks, lack of public transportation before removing courtesy riders from this route? It's caused significant distress to many parents and families in the community. And I appreciate that it was mentioned this evening that there's a meeting planned for tomorrow for those discussions, so I can leave it until then and hope that you would consider these questions as a part of that. So I don't require an answer, but I would like them to be considered. My second question was about portables. Based on the information that came in the presentations tonight, 4 of the incoming portables that were discussed tonight were based on the CEF from last year's requests. How many portable moves or new portables are currently needed this year based on increased enrollment? You mentioned 2, but is it a total of 6, or is it going to be more?
My initial answer to that question question is, we have 4 portables that were from last year that are being allocated. And I think you probably mean not just due to enrollment, but due to enrollment and or the restored language? Yes, okay. So Pete, I don't know if you have a firm number, but we're still in that process of determining, and I think that final enrollment and space needs can be reported out in October, probably once we've done that final count. Like we are literally still having those discussions. Are we converting a computer lab? Are we adding a portable? Are we moving a portable? So unless our deputy superintendent or our director of planning and operations can comment further than that, I'm just hesitant to, because it's a moving target right now.
I think that we can say that we did move one to NDSS and one to Center Bar, as I reported in my presentation, and that there are 4 through CEF, 2 of which have landed on sites, and the sites were indicated. The other 2 are not here yet. That's the information.
Too late. So may I follow up?
Sure.
Thank you. Can the information that gets shared at the next business committee meeting, when that information comes back, be quite specific for the public around portables, classroom, whichever classrooms have been changed? Maybe it's computer labs, maybe it's student support services. We've heard that some of our student support teachers might have to move out of their rooms that they're in, just to be specific about the moves and changes based on our enrollment, because it's a big change. And we're lucky that we're increasing, but.
Just to answer that a little bit. So one of the things that we have instituted is when anybody asks a question and it goes to staff for an answer, we try to make that part of the public record and have a mechanism to capture that and make sure that it's included because it is part of question period. Do you still require a report out at a meeting, or would having it be part of the public record be enough?
If the portable answer is part of the public record, actually for both, public record is acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Now, yes, you may. Seconder? Trustee Brzovic, all in favor? We're out of here. Thank you very much.